So long, Pop.
Well, I'll tell you, Captain, we've got 2 flights going out of here tonight. One eastbound, one westbound. You'll have to ask the pilot. Which way you going?
Which one leaves first?
Eastbound, 8 o'clock.
That'll be fine. I'll just hang around the field until then.
Say, you don't seem to care where you're going.
That's right, chum. I don't.
Hortense. Hortense. Listen to this. Sit down. Headquarters, 8th Air Force. Award of the Distinguished Flying Cross. Here. Despite intense pain, shock, and loss of blood, with complete disregard of his personal safety, Captain Derry crawled back to his bomb site, guided his formation on a perfect run over the objective, and released his bombs with great accuracy. The heroism, devotion to duty, professional skill, and coolness under fire displayed by Captain Derry under the most difficult conditions reflect highest credit upon himself and the armed forces of the United States of America. By command of Lieutenant General Doolittle.
Hello and welcome to Book versus Movie. This is a podcast where we read books that have been adapted into movies and then we try to decide which we like better, the book or the movie. I am Margot P. of coloniabook.com and this is my good friend and co-host Margot D. of Brooklyn Fitchick.
Hi everyone.
So we were just talking about today's book and movie before we got on the air. I'm very excited to talk about it. Like it was very unexpected. A lot of stuff about this that I thought I knew, but I didn't actually know. And but before we get into that, this is a podcast in case you're brand new and maybe you joined us last time and you were like, oh, I love Little Foxes. This is cool. They do movies adapted from plays. We do. But we also do movies adapted from books and magazine articles. When the pandemic started, we decided to do a brand new episode every single week. And that means we had to expand when we say book versus movie to mean really any movie that has been adapted from any kind of literary source. So ideally something not too long.
Right.
And we are always looking for suggestions. And if you have suggestions, because we have some months here that we don't have quite the programming nailed down yet. So we are really, really looking actively right now. If you have some suggestions for some books and movies that you think would be fun to do, if you want to meet other listeners of this podcast or interact with us, there's a few places where you could do that on the internet.
Yes, we have a basic Facebook page. Be sure to like it. But if you want to interact more, we're more interactive in our Facebook group. So you type in Book vs. Movie Podcast group. It's just a place in Facebook. We've created a space where we just talk about books and movies and pop culture and movie stars. We also are on Twitter and Instagram. And at both those places, you spell out book versus a movie. Or you can reach us at our old-timey email, book versus movie podcast, spelled it all out, at gmail.com.
And if you really enjoy the show and would like to help keep us in books and movies, you can also support us on Patreon.
Yes, we've been doing the show for 9 years now. Believe it or not, I know. We're just staring at each other like, are you kidding? Nope. We have been doing it for 9 years. We're putting all of our episodes from 2020 that previous to that are up on our Patreon wall. They are no longer streaming. And these are the ones we just put up: Blue Crush, Steel Magnolias, A Room with a View. And then coming up, we have Top Gun, Of Mice and Men, Enola Holmes, Harold and Maude. These are all coming up in the next couple of months. And it's Patreon. And it just helps us with the cost for the book and the movies. We also do ask, by the way, we should say that the the book has to be something we can get our hands on pretty easily, and the movie needs to be streaming on a major app, on a platform. It can't be a DVD or something like that. So for all of you that do support us at Patreon, we really do appreciate it.
I was really surprised with this week's book and movie how easy the book was to find, because you really, there's not very much available in terms of background that I could find online about it. Although there is some stuff about the author who's kind of an interesting character. We're going to be talking about The Best Years of Our Lives, my father-in-law's favorite movie of all time, and which is based on a book called Glory for Me by Kantor, right? But what's the first name?
MacKinlay Kantor. So he's
MacKinlay Kantor.
Benjamin MacKinlay Kantor, and his middle name was McKinley, but he actually changed the spelling of it to be a little more Scottish. So he's Swedish and Jewish in his background. He was born 1904 in Webster City, Iowa. Was always a writer during World War II, and this is a story that's set post-World War II. These are one of the first movies about returning soldiers, World War II. This is certainly William Wyler's first film after being in the war.
I mean, it's super soon. He liberated Buchenwald. He was one of the troops that walked in and liberated Buchenwald concentration camp. I mean, just a fascinating career that he's had.
Are you talking about Wyler or?
I'm talking about Kantor.
Yeah, he was stationed. He reported from London as a war correspondent for an LA newspaper, but like a lot of times, those journalists were embedded with the troops wherever they went. William Wyler was embedded with troops. He was filming bombing missions over Europe. Kantor wrote a lot about the Civil War, some about the Independence, and then for World War II. So he comes back to America, and Samuel Goldwyn, the origin story seems to be that Samuel Goldwyn, who was a big-time movie producer, he read an article in Time magazine, and it was about a group of soldiers on a train going home, I guess, from San Diego to New York. She's in San Diego. I'm in New York, by the way. But as they're going cross country, the reporter that followed them, the closer they got home, the more quiet they all became. And they all kind of talked about they expected big parades when they came home and all this, and it didn't happen. And that's one of the stories that was in Time magazine. So he commissioned Kantor, who was known for writing all kinds of war stories. He said, "Can you write me a screenplay?" And Kantor, and he's a cantankerous guy, apparently, in his life. He was very salty. He was a heavy drinker. He liked to provoke people.
He seems to be quite the character. Yeah.
Well, he wrote Glory for Me, but he wrote it as a long poem, so it's in verse. That's what he turned in to Samuel Goldwyn.
Yeah, Goldwyn. Seriously,
not
like
what
balls,
I would do.
dude.
The balls of this guy size of church bells. I mean, he turned that in.
And by the way, not just that, but this book, y'all, I was not because I know I've seen this movie so many times, and it is a brilliant movie, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. This book is, I mean, it's like journalism. It's so interesting. It's a novel. It's written in verse form. So it's a quick read, but it's not an easy read. He's following, if you know the movie, it's all the same characters from the movie. So Fred is the main character, Fred Derry. He's the soldier coming back to war, to this fictional place called Boone City, which is sort of based on, I forget, Cincinnati. Yeah. He's coming home. He meets on his way home other returning servicemen, one named Al Stevenson, who is older. He's got 2 kids who are almost grown. And then they also meet a fellow named
Homer.
Oh, I'm forgetting his last name.
All I want to say is Homer's sexual from The Simpsons.
No. No. Homer so they're all like kind of talking about their experiences, but Homer has been severely injured in a way that has left him. He's permanently disabled to a degree that he will never be able to hold a job. He's not going to be able to do a lot without, especially in the 1940s, we're talking about.
Right.
And there's just not very many resources available to him. He's got something has happened to his face, right? That he's not really able to talk.
There was a bombing. And it was shelling activity, and he had a head injury, but it's now a brain injury on top of that. But it affected his appearance, and
yes,
and he also has PTSD.
Yeah, they all do. Yes,
right.
but Homer's what I'm trying to say is Homer's disability is, if you're familiar with the film, is much more physically obvious than the fellow in the film. Homer has uncontrollable his body moves uncontrollably. He has muscle spasms. He drools uncontrollably, and consequently, and like I said, he has difficulty speaking. Consequently, most people seeing him at first glance think that he's drunk, which will come up later in the book. So just like in the movie, if you're familiar with the movie, Fred has had a hasty pre-war marriage. And Al has been married for a very long time. As we said before, he's a banker. He's got these two very nice, stable job at the bank. And Fred, who really is the main character, always kind of keeps coming back to Fred. So Fred is 21 in the book. And it tells us over and over again, he's 21. He's killed 100 men. And this is what he walks around with all of the time. The book is much more realistic, much grittier. There's a lot more sex. I mean, I'm shocked for 1940. I'm like clutching my pearls the whole time. But it's a realistic depiction of what these young men were going through, being gone from home for so long, away from their wives and girlfriends. And but anyway, Fred comes home. And this is a little bit different in the movie than it is in the book. But in the book, as soon as he comes home to his wife, and again, they'd only been married for like a couple of weeks, there's another man there with her. He catches her with this other man. And not only that, there is evidence of multiple other men in the apartment. There's clearly like a couple of guys. This is one of their little home bases that they've got, because they're keeping their shoes and like their razor and stuff like that. And so his marriage breaks up a lot sooner in the book than it does in the movie, which is fine. It's a good device. I think the way it's done in the movie is very good. So just like in the movie, Al, the banker, has a daughter named Peggy, and Homer, who's disabled, it's not his uncle, but he has a very, very good family friend, neighbor, Butch, who owns this bar. And so there are different scenes in the book where they meet up at this bar with Butch. And as they are struggling to readjust to quote unquote normal life, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and like you say, it's in verse form, so it just sort of and it is very graphic in the details. I mean, because he even talks about he had sex when he was on his tour of duty. Like, he almost doesn't blame her. He kind of understands, like, people, you get lonesome, whatever. I mean, but he's very realistic about it. Interesting about Kantor is he also wrote a book called Andersonville, which was eventually turned into a TV movie. I think it was TNT, but it's a story about a real prisoner of war camp that was in the South for the Confederate soldiers, and it was a pit. It was hell. And that, I think it earned him the Pulitzer Prize. That was his big reward.
Yeah, he's an excellent writer.
Yeah.
But I just can't believe that this is what he turned in. Like, as you're reading it, you're like, he calls you for a Hollywood movie. I don't know. Like, did he think he wasn't serious? I don't know. But the story, it's not. it's not something you could put on film in 1940, whatever, you
and
know?
he'd written some screenplays before. He's a prolific writer. It's kind of, but he was very interested. He did want to hear the other side of the story. He was always he didn't want to just tell the one side, the one story, the rah-rah, the GI is a perfect kid from Boone City and blah, blah, blah. He was much more interested in the edges and what was really happening. And that was his, as a person, he was like right of center, we would say nowadays. That was his political belief. So Vietnam War happens. He's got his opinions about that. And apparently he was a heavy drinker. And like I said, a provocateur. He tend to kind of poke people. And one of his grandson wrote a biography called The Most Famous Writer Who Ever Lived, A True Story of My Family. And it was sort of like a tribute. But he was talking about his grandfather was considered a celebrity in the family, but nobody really knew who he was outside of their family. He had these two. He's connected to a hit movie, and then he's connected to, at the time, the movie wasn't made yet of Andersonville, but that was his big peak. And then the 50s and 60s, it kind of, the money, and he was spending as soon as the money came in. He lived hard, as we would say.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's true. I mean, this movie is extremely famous, but just so, just to get back to the book real quick, because there are some differences apart from Homer, the nature of Homer's disabilities. Fred and Peggy do eventually develop a relationship in a similar way as in the film. But then there's a scene where there's two things that are not in the movie at all, but are really important to the book in terms of plot points. There is a scene where Al, the banker, he's working in his bank. And they allude to this in the film, that Al is more inclined to take what would be on paper a financial risk on these returning veterans than his bank higher ups are willing to do. But in the book, it's a little bit different. In the book, one of the bank's wealthiest investors, this woman, comes in and she's like, "Listen, Al, I'm your number one customer, and this kid, I forget if it's somebody who wants to marry into her family or something like that,
right? And
he's going to come in here wanting a loan, and I don't want him to have any. Basically, I don't want him to have any financial success of any kind. Make sure you don't give him the loan." And this young man is a returning veteran, and so Al tells the woman off in a very graphic, un-Al-like way. Now, while this is happening, Fred, our main character, Fred's situation is becoming more and more desperate. He cannot find work anywhere. He is in love with Peggy, and Peggy is in love with him, but he doesn't have any. He's got PTSD. He's really not able to land a job to save his life at all. And he becomes so desperate. And he's also using alcohol. They're all using alcohol to a certain degree. They're all self-medicating because there were no, as we say today, there were no tools available to them. So Fred is becoming more and more desperate. And he comes to this decision. I think he's drunk at the time, but he decides to rob the bank at gunpoint. And so he walks into the bank, he's got a gun in his pocket, he's got the note, the demand note, and he's waiting in the line. He's right about to step up and rob this bank when Al starts creating a ruckus, telling off this wealthy patron. And Al really makes a big scene. Mm-hmm. Enough so that Al realizes, "Ooh, I guess I'm not working at the bank anymore." So Al is the one who gets fired in the book as opposed to Fred in the movie. Al, he realizes what he's done, and he's like, "Okay, well, I'm going. I'm just going to leave right now." And he sees Fred in line. He's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad. A friendly face. Fred, you got to come with me. We're going to go to Butch's."
I'll see myself out.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. He's like, "Yeah, I know where the door is." Yeah. And he grabs his buddy Fred out of the line. He thinks he's just in line at the bank. He's like, "You got to come with me to Butch's. Let's go get a drink at Butch's." And And I gotta figure out like what I'm going to tell my wife. What am I going to do? What am I going to do now? And they're talking at Butch's, and they're talking about Peggy and all of that. And Fred admits, he's like, listen, and he shows them the gun. He shows them the note. He's like, I was actually about to rob your bank when all this happened. Are you still sure you want me like having to do anything with your daughter? And Al's like, yeah, listen, we're all not dealing with this very well, basically. Right. And in the end, what Al decides to do is he goes into business with the young man who he gave the loan to, that the woman didn't want the loan, could give it. And that's what he does. So he's not going to make as much money, but he is probably going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because as we know, the post-war economy was really something here in the U.S. Now, Homer is really struggling. Homer, like I said, people don't understand him when he talks. People think he's drunk. Sometimes he is. He has this girlfriend. He doesn't know what to do. The family doesn't know what to do with him. And sadly, he becomes more and more desperate, and he makes an attempt on his own life. I'm sorry, I should have given a trigger warning about this, but it was unsuccessful.
Right.
So he shoots himself, but he misses. He injures himself, but he doesn't. I don't think he further disables himself with the attempt. But it was only because Fred got there. Fred happened to go by there just in time to botch this attempt and save Homer's life. And so, and it's really all of them coming to the realization, like, hey, we've just been kind of plunked back into society, like nothing has happened to us. Mm-hmm. And, Homer's not the only one who's disabled here. We've all got our different things that we're trying to work through. And what they determine is that, like, the only person who's going to get through to Homer is his girlfriend, Wilma. So Wilma, so they go and get Wilma, and she, are they going to have a relationship? Probably not.
No.
They're not going to get married, I don't think, but she is there for him, because they've known each other all their lives. So she really does kind of come in at the right time to help, to say that, you don't have to go through this by yourself. And no matter what happens between us two, I'm always going to be part of your life, and we're always going to figure it out, kind of thing. And so the book ends like that. So the book ends that Homer has some support, and Fred and Peggy, I forget what Fred's job is. He does get some kind of employment. I don't remember what it is in the book. It's a little bit different than in the movie.
Yeah.
But it's something. And so he and Peggy, maybe have a bit of a future. And Al, is no longer a banker. He just doesn't want to be part of that world anymore, but he is part of I think it's a farm or something that he's investing in with this young man. And that's where he's going. And, the book ends on sort of like, this is the best in the terms of glory that our country has to offer these men who have put so much on the line and risked so much and lost so much. So it's just fascinating. It's a really, really interesting book.
He also, I said he wrote about Andersonville, he also did a lot of writing about, well, what if the South had successfully seceded from the Union? What would that look like? He tried to think about, at the prisons, over at the concentration camps, like, what did it mean for the citizens that lived there? How do you live with yourself knowing that something like that? If you really truly didn't know, how would you deal with it anyway? But if you did know this whole time, how do you process that? And he's very much interested, like I said, in the edges and in the unpretty details and in the and the uncomfortable truths.
I think all the men have flashbacks to, trauma that they experienced in the war throughout the book. It's really interesting. And then also the way that the women, the way that the women are written in this book is kind of interesting. We don't get that much of Al's wife. We get that she's pretty, we get that she's supportive.
Right.
She obviously kept things going while he was gone. Their marriage is intact. We were not worried about their marriage at all. She obviously did a good job with the kids, but we don't get. I like that the movie gives us more of her as a person.
Right.
I was very surprised by this book. Very surprised at how frank it was.
Yeah.
Not just how graphic it was, but how frank it was about this, not just the trauma that these men went through in the war, which it is very frank about that, but it's also very frank about then the challenges that they face trying to re-enter society in a post-war economy, which is thriving, but they're not thriving, and nobody's helping them deal with, processing this in any way.
We just didn't, after World War I, there wasn't supposed to be any more world wars. So we had first we had this like amazing economy, and then we had the Great Depression. We didn't really have a huge army before we entered World War II. It was more militia style. And so these things had to be all created, getting the men across the country to get them on boats, to get them to Europe. And think about most of them didn't speak two languages or only spoke English and all these other things where he's writing about the realistic stuff, because we had all this all through the war when they were making movies. There was a lot of rah-rah.
We had a great deal of propaganda, to move something like that. You need that.
Yeah, to get people, because right before that, and we've talked about this before, there was an America First movement that was very popular. We don't want to interfere with what's going on.
No, we don't need to get involved with any kind of Holocaust. What are we doing?
I know. So it was Lindbergh was a huge star, and that was one of his gaffes, let's just say politely, about him. But anyway, so let's go back to this property. So Kantor goes on, writes, basically drinks himself, but he lived to 77, which for his generation, that's actually a pretty decent. It's older than my father when he passed away. So that's
mine too.
Right.
I mean, he really, I agree. For what it seems like kind of a hard living lifestyle. Yes. I mean, it's pretty good.
For that generation, he actually turned out pretty well. You can't take it with you. So he was enjoying as much as he could. That's how I'll put a button on it. But it's a very interesting read. It's pretty easy to get your hands on. And if you've never heard him before, it's the first time we've done verse, by the way, like a total novel length verse poem.
As a novel in verse, no, we've done like epic poems before,
right.
But no. And this is an unusual. I mean, novels in verse are always unusual anyway, and it's well done.
Yeah. No, he's an influencer too. Corn McCormick says he's one of his idols. There's quite a few writers that anyway. So let's get to the best years of our lives. So we're returning to the William Wyler. So he went to Little Foxes just before we entered World War II. Then World War II happens, and major directors like John Ford, John Huston, they all served in certain capacities to film the war. The government wanted this, and Hollywood wanted this, because a lot of their actors were going overseas and serving, like Jimmy Stewart, whatever. So William Wyler does go, and he's in the bombardier. He's up in the air with all that stuff happening. And in fact, he loses most of his hearing. He also becomes injured during the war because of the war. So they had to create a special thing for him to be able to listen to actors, because he would have to have the volume so high, and it would ruin all the equipment and everything. But so anyway, he's interested in the story. MGM is interested in the story. They read what that was presented to them, Glory for Me, and we're like, yeah, we can't. I mean, we'll use the names.
We can't. This is not a Hollywood movie.
This is 1946. We're still in the Hays Code, by the way. Like, there's just no way we're going to film this. So they turn to Robert Sherwood, who is a very popular writer. I was reading about him. He was in Dorothy Parker's Vicious Circle. Campbell Scott played him in that movie.
Oh,
the Jennifer Jason Leigh movie.
I remember now. Yeah.
I was into Dorothy Parker. Like, I went through a phase where I was like reading all of her stuff. She's fantastic. So they give the screenplay to him, and basically the directive is like, this needs to be realistic. And he did not enjoy writing this movie, because he wanted to do more of the edgy stuff. Wyler wanted to do more of the edgy stuff because they knew what was going on, but the studio was like, no.
There's no way that you would be able to. I mean, there's just no way.
But they do some really interesting things. So they decide that Harold Russell is a veteran he was 23 years old, 22 years old, and Wyler had met him, and he became injured training for duty. He was in North Carolina, and he taught himself how to work with bombs, and one went off in his hands, and he lost his hands.
Yeah.
So he had clips on his hands the Navy taught him for a couple of years how to use them. And maybe it's just his personality, whatever. He just went with it.
He seems to be quite a resilient,
that's a good
kind
word.
of person, and not everybody is like that.
No, and it's not judgment. It's just
no. But he was such a success, if you want to use that word. That the Navy, I think it was a naval film that they used him in this movie, this promotional movie called, I forget, something in the hands of a soldier, hands of a sergeant. I don't remember what it was called, but it was a promotional, marketing film that they did to show how they were, to show off some of the veteran services that were being provided after the war. So Wyler saw him in that and thought he would be good for this film.
And Harold, he was very young when he entered the war. He was a high school jock. He played football, baseball, track, handsome. And like you said, just very resilient. They taught him how these skills. And he meets up with William Wyler, and then that's when they get the idea, how are we going to portray Homer, the book Homer versus the movie Homer? When you see, like I said, Harold Russell, he's handsome and young, baby-faced. It's not till you see the hands that he has that you don't even know things wrong with him. I don't mean to be ableist. I mean, he has that challenge. And so it's just decided.
Well, that's something that they have in the film, is that he's sitting there, when we first meet him, he is sitting in an airplane terminal. He's got his hands in his coat pocket. And somebody asks for help, carrying something heavy, and all these men get up and he doesn't get up. And they're like, well, it must be nice to just sit around
here.
Basically.
Yeah.
And there are, and that's kind of the point of the film and the book. There are so many disabilities that are completely invisible to an outside observer, that people, that are challenging in a number of ways. But Homer's happens to be one that's quite visible. Not as visible as the Homer in the book. And the Homer in the book can't even really walk unassisted.
Right. We should play the trailer.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to play the trailer now, and we'll talk about this incredible movie.
These are the great personalities who bring a memorable experience to glowing life. Samuel Goldwyn's masterpiece. The screenplay was written by Robert E. Sherwood, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright of Petrified Forest and Idiot's Delight. From this, William Wyler, who won the Academy Award for his direction of Mrs. Miniver, wove a pattern of motion picture magic, with Myrna Loy and Fredric March living through the heartwarming second bloom of love. Dana Andrews and Teresa Wright feeling the breathtaking thrill of love at first sight. Hoagie Carmichael spreading his own brand of stardust. All of them together, giving all of us the best years of our lives.
So the cast of this film is like a murderer's row of amazing.
It's super good.
Oh my God.
Super good. Yeah. And I think all of that, because there's a lot of incidental supporting characters, and also just people who have one line, two line, the people at the bank, the people at the airport. They're all wonderful too.
Yes.
Everybody in this movie is so good.
Leo Penn, who's Sean Penn's father, was a TV director. He's the guy at the airport that checks. Everybody, like Margos said, is really good. This movie was, let's say, Myrna Loy, Fredric March, Dana Andrews, Teresa Wright. We talked about her last week. Virginia Mayo and Harold Russell. Those are our main people, but there's all kinds of other people in the cast.
Hoagie Carmichael.
Hoagie Carmichael.
As Uncle Butch.
Yes.
He's wonderful in this.
So
He's he's super good. And I like that they made him an actual part of the family.
Mm-hmm.
In the book, he's like a close family friend. He's a neighbor. He lives across the street from Homer's family, and they've all known each other for years and years. But why not just make him an actual member of the family? I love it.
Sit down, Homer. Wilma phoned.
Wilma? What does she want?
You.
Oh, why can't they leave a guy alone?
Because they're fond of you, that's why. What made you leave the house and get them all worried?
Oh, they got me nervous.
How?
Butch, it's nothing. I don't want to talk about it.
How'd they get you nervous?
Well, they keep staring at these hooks, or else they keep staring away from them.
You mean whatever they do is wrong?
Why don't they understand that all I want is to be treated like everybody else? Take Pop, for instance. He was cleaning his pipe like I've seen him do 1,000,000 times. And all of a sudden he got conscious that he had hands, and I didn't, and he stopped cleaning his pipe, and he tried to hide his hands like he was guilty or something.
Give them time, kid. They'll catch on. You know, your folks will get used to you, and you'll get used to them. Then everything will settle down nicely. Unless we have another war. Then none of us have to worry, because we'll all be blown to bits the first day. So cheer up.
I saw a little interview with Virginia Mayo.
Yes.
And she was saying that she had read, somehow she had gotten her hands on Glory for Me and had read it, and it was like, I want to play the wife. I really want to play this wife. It took some convincing. She was working on, I think, Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Is that the one?
Yes, she
was. One of the Danny Kaye ones.
We talked about her. We did that episode.
Which episode? Oh, we did Secret Life of Walter Mitty. I forgot we did that.
I think that's on our Patreon.
9 years, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, they all merge. We tell you, I was the other day, I was like, we should do an episode on AI, that Steven Spielberg one. And then I just go right to the folder on my phone. I'm like, oh, we did it. Okay. No, but we have lots of great ideas coming up, by the way.
So, yeah, she was going back and forth between doing Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And this is such an awesome performance. I love Virginia Mayo anyway. I think she's really great.
Go right in. Gee, Woody's a cute boy. He's a lot of fun. He's got a lot of dough, too. His family owns half the city, practically. Certainly has a terrific end for you, Peggy. You know, I don't want to butt into your personal affairs, but if you'll take my advice, dear, you'll grab Woody, but quick. Woody and I are good friends, but there's no romance there. Never mind the romantic part of it. That takes care of itself. And I'm speaking from experience. They'll tell you money isn't everything. Well, maybe it isn't, but boy, how it helps. Do you know that while Fred was away, I was drawing over $500 a month? I mean, from his army pay and the job I had. Now the two of us got to live on what Fred gets from being a drugstore cowboy. $32.50 a week. Poor Fred. I guess you think he's an awful sourpuss. He didn't used to be that way, though. Army's had an awful effect on him. Knocked all the life out of him.
Fred isn't going to be satisfied with that job at the drugstore. He'll get something better.
Oh, sure. Maybe in 5 years he'll be drawing down 40 or 50 bucks. You can't have happy marriages on that kind of dough.
She's so good in this. Like this wife is, you know, I mean, there were a lot of people like this who the war happens, as you said, World War I has ended. Nobody expected the U.S. to be going to war so soon again. People still remembered how horrific World War I was. So there was this kind of end of the world kind of, let's get married. People jumped into these things and didn't give them a great deal of thought.
My dad was born in 1940, And he said when he was young, his parents told him, we were wondering if we should bring you into this world. Like, what is going to happen?
I'm sure
they were very concerned. I love the. I mean, I'm going to say this. This is actually one of my favorite movies. It makes me cry every time.
I cry every time.
I'm sobbing. It starts brilliantly because they're at the airport. And there is Dana Andrews, like, ready to go. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Fredric
looking
March.
very handsome.
He's hot here. I make fun of Dana Andrews in some movies, but I think he's great here. And
he's great in this. I agree.
Fredric March is,
they're all so good.
But
they're all so good.
So he's at the airport and he's in his gear, he's like, I want to go home. And the stewardess, I'm sorry, the person that's like setting up the ticket is like, yeah, we're booked. Maybe tomorrow, the next
maybe
day.
next week.
Maybe next week. And somebody next to him, like a year before, would have given up his seat in a heartbeat. And this time he's packing his golf clubs there. So we're told,
he's like, excuse me.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Thanks for your service. Bye. I got first class tickets here. So he has to go to this center where all these planes are like dropping off GIs, veterans now all over the country. And they're like, okay, we're making about 10 stops. We have to get gas and stuff like that. So we'll be by your place, Boone City, maybe tomorrow afternoon. And they're like, great. That's in the book, by the way. That is in fact how they meet these three men. It was a big deal, production, by the way, to get all these servicemen and women overseas back to America. Like the processing and all that it took a long time. So no, there weren't big parades for everybody because after a while it was like there were so many people coming home. So they realize they're not special. Like there's a bunch of them, but then they are special because they've been through this very intense experience. Like, how do you explain to people? And so we have Fredric March, he's so good in this movie. He's the older man. He's like 50. He was a banker. Myrna Loy. I mean, I just love Myrna Loy to like a ridiculous degree. She's so good as his wife. But the three main men, Harold Russell, who, like I said, lost his hands. We have Dana Andrews, who's playing like 35-ish. He's much younger in the book. Fred is older here.
The book says over and over again that Fred is 21.
Right. Dana Andrews is not. But
it's not 21.
No.
but also he's very decorated.
Right.
He was somebody who, before the war, he worked in a soda counter. He worked in a drugstore, but in the war, we learn over the course of the film, he really put himself in a great deal of danger. He saved a lot of lives, and he was extremely well respected. So you see the servicemen always treat him with a tremendous amount of respect, but the non-service folk treat him like the guy that works in the drugstore.
We should also say, I did just say, but I'll say it again. Just before this, we had the Great Depression. So it's not like everybody had all these great skills, like were hired, interned here and did a gig there. Some of them, the soda jerk at the pharmacy was the gig you could get.
Or educated.
There was...
Yeah.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. You just reminded me. I forgot to mention at the end of the book, that's what I was trying to remember about Fred. So Fred has a little job. I still can't remember what his job is, but he is also about to go back to college. He's going to go to college on the GI Bill.
Right, which changed America, by the way. Which
changed America. So we, the reader, know like, oh, he's going to be okay. It's going to be hard for a few years, but ultimately Fred and Peggy, we're not worried about Fred and Peggy. So yes, you just reminded me. Because these men, the Great Depression, like people were just barely surviving before they got shipped off to war. And they didn't necessarily have college degrees or vocational schools or any of this stuff.
You got a gig wherever you got work wherever you could, and you were lucky to do it. So the first person, they take a cab home, and the first person is Homer. And Homer had called his family. They know what happened. His girlfriend Wilma lives next door. It's I start bawling like right away.
Okay, the
Homer
little girl.
Home.
The little sister gets me I'm even choking up just thinking about every time, that little girl is so good. She gets me. I can't not cry when the little sister is involved.
And also this time, because it's been about 10 years since I've seen this movie, the mother I never really noticed before, and how she's just keeping it together for him. Like, it's going to be okay. Because they didn't know we were coming home that day. These guys were up in a plane flying all over the country. The families didn't even know. They just show up. So they're just taking this all in. He has his hooks on his hands. He hugs Wilma, but he doesn't know to touch her hair because he's so in shock of like his appearance, and does she care? Does she not care? And the other men can tell right away, and they're in the cab watching this. Like, yeah, this Homer's going to have some struggle.
Okay, let's go.
Well? Oh, don't. I'll carry it. What's the matter, Ma?
It's nothing.
It's just that your ma's so glad to see you home.
Yeah, I know.
Dana Andrews goes home. So first it's Fredric March. He goes home and it's got a swanky apartment that I'd love to live in, like at this nice building. His gorgeous wife, Myrna, who's like, oh, I look terrible. I'm like, no, you don't. You're so beautiful.
She's radiant.
Close. And William Wyler, by the way, he wanted to make this a serious, real film. He told the main actresses, here's some money, go to the stores and buy clothes, but you're not going to have a studio wardrobe. So it's not going to look
It's true. And it's,
it's
no,
like a designer outfits.
And great. It works so well for the movie. You believe, every single character in the, like you just said, like Homer's mom is wearing a dress that a woman her age would have bought at Sears or whatever.
Right.
And Myrna Loy, yes, she's a banker's wife, but she's also been trying to keep this household going throughout the war. So her clothes are also they're kind of economical as well. Like they're maybe a little higher end, but they're still, yeah. And it really does give it such an authenticity. It would have been so easy to put Virginia Mayo, when they go to the nightclub, put her in some like amazing Edith Head gown. But no, she definitely looks like she's wearing something that she's wears a lot, and that she kind of splurged on, and it's a little tacky, and
it's what she could afford.
I love that about it.
So Virginia Mayo, so Dana Andrews goes home, and his father, I guess that's his stepmother, Hortense. I love the name Hortense. He visits them, and it's very realistic. They kind of live in a shack. Like that's just how some homes were. And he says, "Where's my wife? She's supposed to be living with y'all." And they're like, "Oh, well, she got a job at a nightclub, and she just kind of wanted to live on her own." And so he shows up at the house, and she's got a fella, and she's wearing, she's got perfume, and like you said, like the silky dress, and he knows something's up. Like something is going on with her. They knew each other like a couple of weeks before they got married.
Yeah,
they're kids, so they don't know each other.
Yeah, he also realizes exactly that like I don't know her all that well. So perhaps, maybe I was a little hasty in picturing us like growing old on the porch together.
Right, because he's like I said, and this happened quite often. A lot of veterans didn't even apply. They didn't even get their medals. There's quite a few that's a thing. Like they just don't even want to be reminded of it. And also because they had lost so many friends overseas in the battle, so they don't celebrate that. I
can't even imagine.
It's so
I
much,
just can't even imagine.
It's so much on the human soul. I think that is such a big burden. And like I said, some of them were just kids. Middle America, never been anywhere, never been to York or anything, and this anyway.
Yeah. Well, like Homer talks about, like, this is the first time he's ever been on a plane.
Yeah.
Is coming home from the war.
Right.
And no one in his family has ever been on a plane.
It's very...
That is one of my favorite scenes of his, by the way. His acting, because he's
brilliant.
not an actor.
No.
It's so good. And this is a credit also to Wyler and Sherwood that they've written this role so well. Like the dialogue is super, super good. And it's expositional without hitting you over the head. And I love that scene where their three men are in the airplane and they finally are over, where they can recognize stuff. And Homer is so excited because he's never been in a plane,
right?
And he's never seen his hometown from up above like
he was in the Navy. He was
because he was on a ship,
right?
And I just think his acting in this scene is amazing because he's talking about like, oh, that's my high school. Oh, I threw so many touchdowns. I forget what his position he played on, but he played football. We get that he was an athlete, and we get all of this backstory about him and his life and his family and how much he loves his hometown. He really is acting so well in this film because it gives us a three-dimensional view of this young man that carries him through the entire rest of the picture. So, when we meet him, when we drop him off and his parents are there and his girlfriend is there, like we have a really nice idea of who he is and what his background is and who was the young man who left, who they last saw,
Right.
And he's just phenomenal in this.
And at some point, somebody was trying to get him acting lessons, and William Wyler said, "Absolutely not. He is a perfect," and he holds his weight next to people like Fredric March and Dana.
He totally does.
Carmichael is great too.
Hoagie Carmichael, they're all great. Yeah, I love all of the scenes with Homer and what's Hoagie Carmichael? Butch.
Butch's place.
All of their scenes together are really sweet. Like you really buy. They have this long history. This uncle's sort of the black sheep of the family because he owns a bar, but he really, really loves Homer, and they trust each other and they have a rapport. Homer can talk to him about stuff he can't talk to his own parents about. It's awesome.
And we should say in the movie they make kind of a deal like he's so worried about you lose. I knew this when I broke my ankle and I was stuck home and I couldn't leave my apartment. You remember you visited me, but there was a couple of weeks I could not leave, and I was like, I feel like a baby. If something happened to me, who would know? Who's gonna, and he's like that. He has to have his father help. In the movie, they have to have him have his father help him take his arms off and on the apparatus. In life, he could do it in a snap. He, like I said, super resilient. Fredric March comes home, Al, and he immediately says to his wife and his kids, and he hugs her so hard. I love that. Like, he's so appreciative of being home. And then he's like, let's get drunk. Let's go drinking. And then he wants to go to all the gin joints in all the city.
It's really sweet. It's so
really
cute.
Great.
Like
Gene Krupa?
Because he's not ready to land on Earth just yet, but he's so excited to see his family that let's just all go out and just paint the town. And he really ties one on, and they go from place to place to place, and again they eventually end up at Butch's. We should say too about what is your name? The guy that plays Homer. I suddenly have
Harold Russell.
Talking about him. Harold Russell, thank you. Harold Russell did a lot of work throughout his whole life for veterans and veteran services, and was a real advocate, just as a volunteer. Like it wasn't his job or anything, but he really devoted his life to improving things for vets. And late in his life. He lived to be like in 88 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And late on his life, he had won 2 Oscars for Best Years of Our Lives. He had won for Best Supporting Actor, I believe. And then he was also given a special one-time only Oscar for shining a light on what veterans were going through. And really, it's really amazing. So he had these 2 Oscars, and late in his life, he sold or put up for sale the one for Best Supporting Actor, not the other one, not the Special Veterans one, but the Supporting Actor one. And somebody had bought it anonymously. And after Russell died, it turned out that the person who bought it had donated it back to the Motion Picture Academy.
He did it to pay his wife's medical bills, which is another shame in this country that a veteran that
oh my gosh, the health! Don't get me started.
We won't get you started. I went on a YouTube rabbit hole about Harold Russell, and he was on China Beach. Did you ever watch that show?
Yes,
I love that.
China Beach was great.
Best.
Yeah.
It had a soundtrack that you can't get the show now because they had all these Motown songs.
That's true. They won't play it anywhere.
Yeah, they won't play it anywhere. But so he had his whole life, and he was an inspiration to people with all kinds of disabilities. Al comes home. He paints the town red. He's all excited because he's slim, and he's.
Oh, and they run into Fred.
Right. And then they run into Fred.
No, Fred, they got Fred in tow, who's also very drunk.
Right. They're all drinking together, and they're forming this comradeship together because this is how they're going to survive post-war America. And in the town, everyone respects them, but they're also kind of like, yeah, well, we moved on to the new thing. And there's also this one guy that lectures about like, yeah, the economy's going to go bust now. And I'm like, ha, not really.
No.
No.
Actually, no.
And we should also, I'm going to say it anyway, it's like this is a very white point of view because it was a segregated army. There's a whole different experience that African-American soldiers.
In the next war, the next war on. But yes, that's a very good point. Like when we do see there are some African-American actors in this movie, but one is a maid.
Right.
One is a porter.
At the airport, and I think a waiter or something. I mean,
and they don't really say, they have a little couple of words to say here and there. So that, this is, which one way of looking at it is to say, look, this is how even the people who had the most power and the most privilege, white men, even they were struggling to this degree.
Right.
So I can't even imagine what it must have been like for someone who was not a middle class white heterosexual man, to deal with all of this stuff. So, and I think in that regard, it really, because that is really what would have happened.
Right.
That's what it would have been like. So I think it holds up. Oh, except for that, I do find it hard to believe that there's a taco stand in Boone City.
In Cincinnati in 1946. And as soon as I saw that taco stand, I'm like, Margot would be all over that. But they have their different journeys. Like Al, we talked before, there's he wants to give the money to all the veterans that come in for a bank loan. And they're scolding him about that. His wife is struggling a bit because she ran things the way she wanted to do things for a few years. I love their relationship, and so their daughter Peggy is dating a guy, and she likes him fine, but she's got the hots for Fred because it's Dana Andrews, and why wouldn't you? And she openly says to her parents, they go to lunch, and then he kisses her, and she says to her parents, she's like, I'm going to marry that man. I know he's already married.
And also, it's been 23 hours.
Right. He's miserable. He hates her, and she hates him. It's the right thing to do. And her parents are like, what do you but they give her some space. I mean, they do have a good relationship, and everybody talks about things openly. Homer has a hard time coming back. He has a hard time relating to Wilma, and the actress who plays Wilma looks like she's 15, but it's Kathy O'Donnell.
She does look very young. Her real name was something else. That's her actor name. But she's
21 or 22. Yeah.
You totally buy that these are sweethearts and they've known each other all their lives and they grew up next door to each other. I mean, I totally buy those are his parents.
Yes.
And again, that little, I can't even talk about the little sister. I will start crying. But I just completely buy this whole world.
When they get married,
100%.
I'm at the end of the movie. Spoiler:
I'm
I
always
sobbed.
crying at the wedding.
Oh,
me too. I can't.
They're all there. Everyone shows up. They look great. They look happy. It's so sweet. It's
the little kids singing with Hoagie Carmichael.
Here Comes the Bride. I didn't know.
Repeat after me. With this ring I thee wed.
With this ring I thee wed.
Those whom God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. For as much as Homer and Wilma have consented together in holy wedlock, and have witnessed the same before God and this company, and thereto have given and pledged their troth, each to the other, and have declared the same by giving and receiving a ring, and by joining hands, I pronounce that they are man and wife. God bless you.
You know what it'll be, don't you, Peggy? It may take us years to get anywhere. We'll have no money, no decent place to live. We'll have to work, get kicked around.
Then for Fred, because first he gets a job. He can't get a job anywhere because he didn't really have any training in anything. So he says to Virginia Mayo, there's this college bill that's out. I'm going to go to school for a couple of years, so it's going to be kind of lean. But when I get out,
she's
I'll
like,
have some
no thanks.
She's like, yeah, no, that's not what I signed up for.
Or how about this? how about we just part ways right here, buddy?
How about that? So he goes back to move in with his parents, and he has the hots for Peggy, and her father Al is like, what are you doing with my daughter? I don't know you that well. And he reveres his daughter because she's a really smart kid, and he really cares about her. So Fred is working at this pharmacy / they sold beauty products / they have a soda jerk, which is somebody behind a
drugstore. Drugstore was like that in those days. When I was a kid in our neighborhood is very old timey, and the drugstore that we had was from when did it open? It must have opened in like the 20s or 30s, and it had a perfume counter.
Yep.
It had of course a pharmacy. It had a post office inside the drugstore. It had a little branch of the U.S. Post Office, and a lot of them also had a soda fountain. And all of this was at your little neighborhood drugstore. You could go and get lunch and a malted and pick up some perfume and your asprin. Yeah. And mail a letter.
There's one very funny scene where he's selling perfume and he's like, oh, this is like $16, which is like $100 nowadays. And he goes, but you get a lot. It's a big deal for you. And she goes, really? So he opens up the package and he takes it all out, and then it's like this little bottle of perfume. There's some little jokes which is very funny, but they basically put him behind the counter, and so he's making sundaes and sodas, and those sundaes look delicious. I was drooling. But he's behind the counter, and Homer comes and visits him one day, and they're just gonna have a quick hang. And a man strikes up a conversation with Homer and says, "Hey, what's the deal?" And he's like, "Oh, I was injured during the war." And the guy goes, "Well, that's a waste, And he's espousing
like this jerk is.
Right,
dude.
To his really time and place. He's not drunk or anything. He's just immediately like, "You're a sap. This shouldn't have happened to you." The pro America First talking points, and you don't do that around Fred. So Homer leaps at him, but because he doesn't have hands, he can't punch him. So Fred goes, "I got that for you," and he socks the guy.
We were pushed into war.
Sure, by the Japs and the Nazis, so we had...
Oh, the Germans and the Japs had nothing against us. They just wanted to fight the Limeys and the Reds. And they would have whipped them, too. We didn't get deceived into it by a bunch of radicals in Washington.
What are you talking about?
We fought the wrong people, that's all. Just read the facts, my friend. Find out for yourself why you had to lose your hands. And then go out and do something about it.
You better pay your check, brother, and go home.
Well, who do you think you are?
Pay the cashier right over there.
Coffee, please.
Yes. And that's another thing. Every soda jerk in this country's got an idea he's somebody.
Look here, mister. What are you selling anyway?
I'm not selling anything but plain old-fashioned Americanism.
Some Americanism. So we're all a bunch of suckers, eh? So we should have been on the side of the Japs and the Nazis, eh?
Again, I say, just look at the facts.
I've seen a couple of facts. I've seen a ship go down and over 400 of my shipmates went with it. Were those guys suckers?
That's the unpleasant truth. And the sooner we get wise to it, the better off we're going to...
Ooh, if I only had my hands. You put those down!
Take your hands over there.
Maybe I get through, please. Go get the druggist. Yes,
Make way, please.
What happened? It was Fred Derry. He hit him.
Bring some aromatic spirits of ammonia, iodine and bandages.
Yes, sir.
Don't say it, chum. The customer's always right, so I'm fired. But this customer wasn't right. I'll meet you outside in a minute, kid.
And then there's a crash, and so he's also kind of like, I'll see myself out, thank you. So he's really desperate. He can't get Peggy. He lost his wife. He lost his job. He was applying everywhere, and he tells his parents, I don't know where I'm going to go, but I got to get the hell out. And they're saying, no, please stay. He's like, no, I'm going to go. And so he goes by, and he sees there's this aircraft boneyard is what it's called.
Yeah, we
which is
see
in Ontario,
it at the
California.
We see it at the very beginning of the film when the men are in the airplane and they're flying into Boone City, and they fly over and they see all of these decommissioned airplanes, which I guess. Here's what I was confused about, and this really happened. So it's not about the movie. It's about like the U.S., which is. They decommissioned all of this airplane, all of this military, but very shortly after, like they kind of knew they were going to go to war in Korea. So why just scrap all those planes? I don't get it. But anyway, we see this sea of, the real boneyard of airplanes. And Fred at the beginning of the movie is like, yeah, they're just going to dismantle it's all just scrap metal that we're looking at here. And so he really, after he punches the guy in the drugstore, he really, as he does in the book, he comes to the realization of like, I'm not dealing with this very well at all. And maybe I should kind of go away from my family and the people I love for a little bit until I get myself sorted out. And then I'll try this again, this whole like re-entering my life again. But as he's thinking about that, he goes to the scrapyard and he gets up into one of these airplanes, and he like Margos said, although he's very decorated and he's a hero and he was tremendously valuable to the U.S. military, it's not something that he's terribly proud of. It was a lot of trauma. That all of that represents a great deal of loss of friends and violence and a lot of trauma that he hasn't even started to deal with. And he climbs up into one of the airplanes, and he's just sort of thinking about, what he's seen and what he kind of has to carry with him for the rest of his life. And he sees that they're dismantling the planes already. There's a crew there, a wrecking crew that's already dismantling the planes. And somebody tells him to get out, and he suddenly thinks, well, like, you look like you could use some help.
Yeah.
You got any jobs?
And the guy, they're like, yeah. Can you start now? How about now?
Yeah,
Does now
how about
work
right
for you?
now?
How about that? So he does. And it's good. They're turning it into housing for veterans. That's the whole thing. So to him, it's like investing in the future. So from there, we just get to the wedding, and the wedding, I cry. It's so sweet. It's so wonderful. I'm just like, this movie, that's the end of the movie, but it goes by fast. It's like a almost 3-hour film, but it doesn't feel like it at all.
It's a long film, but no, it doesn't at all, because there's so much going on, and these actors and their dialogue is so good. And the pacing of the story is very compelling, and it does hold your attention. I mean, you don't want to skip any of it, because it's also interesting, and these characters, you just are so involved with all of them. It's an absolutely brilliant film. They really did it right. You know, they just all the way around. Every single member of the crew was also a veteran. As Margos said, the Hollywood industry really contributed to the war effort. They made a lot of films, made a lot of not just propaganda, but also training films, newsreels, documentaries. And so there is a kind of feel of that in this movie. Like, I'm thinking particularly of like when Fred is in the the airplane boneyard. It has a very there are a lot of scenes that have a very documentary newsreel kind of a feeling, and it really lends to the authenticity of the whole thing. Yeah, it's really it's so compelling. It's such a great movie, and I'm amazed how well it holds up.
Yeah, it feels very current in a lot of ways. So it was nominated for 1947 Oscars. It's nominated for, like we said, Harold Russell had won a special award, and it was for his service, because they didn't know if he was going to win the Best Supporting Actor, and so they wanted to make sure he had his moment. So he gets that award, and then he does win for Best Supporting Actor, and the audience goes crazy, and it's a really fun clip to watch, because he's so like, I had an idea, but it won for Best Motion Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Supporting Actor, Screenplay, Film Editing, Scoring, which he didn't like the score, by the way, and honorary award, and the Irving J. Thalb Memorial Award for Samuel Goldwyn. I mean, all these. It's one of the first films that was picked for the National Film Registry at the Library of Congress in 1989. It's on TCM all the time. It's one of those, it's a classic for a reason. It holds up, and it's brilliant.
It's so solid, and there are no weak points. It's like Margot said, it's almost 3 hours long, but you don't feel like, oh, they could have cut this. At no point. There's not a single moment where you're like, this is going a little long. Not at all. You just are so interested in these different people and their characters and the different ways that they're dealing with the same historical event that they've all lived through. It's just terrific. I just loved it. And I have to say, movie, although the book is excellent, I don't get why he wrote it.
Yeah. He was an ornery character. I mean, just from what I'm reading, I did some research on him, and he just was somebody kind of, he took those big risks in his life. Oh, it's definitely going to be a movie for me. I mean, there's just no way.
But I think it's totally worth a read. I mean, the book also super holds up. Yeah, what is that?
It's thunder. It's like thunderstorm in here. Yes.
It sounds like somebody's moving a refrigerator above you. Wow.
Anyway.
Yikes.
Yeah. So,
but I think it really holds up. I think it still is something that is, I mean, I'm not a veteran myself, obviously, but I would wager that Glory for Me is something that would definitely resonate with a contemporary veteran. That there's a lot there that they would see themselves in that story 80 years later. If not, it's longer than that, isn't it? Is it 80? Yeah, it's like 80 years. Both of them really hold up. And I, if you've not read Glory for Me, check it out. It's really fascinating. But of course, it's the movie.
Right. So please send us your suggestions for what we should cover in the future. But we've already decided what we're going to do next. I told Margot, like, I'm totally into Myrna, and I said, what about The Thin Man? And The Thin Man is available on the Libby app. For me,
It's easy to find.
Easy to find. It's like 200 pages. It's streaming everywhere. I said, let's do it. So that's what we're doing next. The Thin Man. It's early Myrna Loy at her best. I can't wait to talk about it with you. And like I said before, follow us on all the things. Send us your ideas and suggestions. We're, like I said, most interactive in the Facebook group, but wherever you hang out, we'll hang out with you. And Margot, where can they find you?
You can find me online at coloniabook.com, and all of my social media callouts are at She's Nacho Mama. And where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Brooklyn Margot. On Instagram, I'm at Brooklyn Fitchick. My site is brooklynfitchick.com, and I am on TikTok at Margot.